This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Friday group programs. New groups are starting in April of 2017, and there are only a limited number of spaces available. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 130. Welcome to the 130th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm doing a special episode for you today. I'm doing another round of my fertility awareness reality series. And so I have for you an on-air client session with one of my clients, Amy, and she was a participant in my most recent group program. She had joined the group to learn fertility awareness for birth control, and we had an amazing 10 weeks together. So we've just wrapped up the previous group program. So Amy wanted to hop on the call today and share her experience with you and also have a live session so that you can see what it's all about. Working with me, I think that these sessions really give a window into what I do and really helps to answer some of those questions, because I know some of you are, kind of like, what does she do in those sessions? So this really gives you a sense of what I do, what the group sessions are about. And I am accepting applications to my April group programs. I'm really excited to be offering the group programs again. And I am doing two groups again, one group for women who are looking to learn the method for birth control, and another group for women who are in that preconception or are actively trying to conceive. And the information itself is essentially the same. And of course, even though the women in my preconception group and conception group are not thinking about birth control, we always talk about the birth control aspect of it, because even though you're not thinking about it now, there will be a time either when you want to space your children or when you will want to use this method for birth control. So we cover the same information, but of course the tone is a little bit different, obviously, just based on where you're at, whether you're trying to conceive or whether you're not. So I do find it to be really beneficial to have two separate groups for that. And just something else I wanted to share with you. I am hosting a live masterclass on Tuesday, April the 4th, 2017. And I would love for you to be there. I recently released an episode where I talked all about menstrual cycle health, periods in particular, what's normal, how much bleeding is normal, what's too much, what's too little. And I find that every time I talk about the topic of menstruation in that way, I get a lot of feedback. I get a lot of women reaching out to me and really wanting to get a sense of what's normal and what's not. So I've decided to jump on a live masterclass. And so if you would like to be part of that, if you would like to join me live and have an opportunity to ask questions in real time, I would love to have you there. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/masterclass and you can jump in and join me live. And if you're interested in the group program or you want to make sure to apply to secure your spot. So I still have some spaces available, but I've had quite a few applications. So if you know that you want to be part of the group, make sure to submit your application while I still have spots. So that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. So without further ado, let's jump into my live client session with Amy. So I'm so excited today to have Amy with me. Amy is a client of mine, and she was a member of my most recent group program. And she has offered so generously to come on the show and share her own experience and basically have a client session. So I always joke that it's like a super private conversation in a very public way. So thank you so much for being here today, Amy.
Oh, thank you. It's really fun to be here.
Yeah, really happy to have you. So we had so much fun in the group program. It's over now. So we've been together for the last 10 weeks, which has been a lot of fun. And you're joining me in the alumni program, which I'm also really excited about. But just so that you can introduce yourself to the audience and they can have a sense of what brought you to the program, but more so before we get to that point, what your history was like, if you've used the pill before, I guess, what brought you to this place of wanting to use fertility awareness?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I was on the pill for 10 years from when I was 16, and I took it nonstop without a break, not even really even thinking about it. So my partner and I, we were talking about, maybe wanting to one day start a family. And then I started thinking to myself, oh gosh, I've been on the pill for 10 years. That sounds like a long time. It probably can't be good. Maybe I should do some kind of research and, find out ahead of time kind of the sorts of things that you should be doing to make sure that you can have a healthy baby later down the track. And I wasn't even really thinking about coming off the pill. I was more thinking about maybe I need to eat some vitamins or change my diet or stress less. And so I found this podcast, actually. That was my first kind of step into this journey. And I listened to a couple of episodes and I kind of thought, God, what am I doing? Why am I on the pill? This is terrible. But also at the same time, how didn't I know? Why didn't anybody tell me? And, I'd been to the doctor coming back, getting my scripts filled for a decade, and nobody had ever said, oh, it can impact your fertility, or it can take a while for your periods to come back or for your cycles to normalize. And so I started digging a little bit deeper, and I thought, nah, the pill is not for me. I think this is a better way to do it. And I was curious as well, both from the perspective of being able to use it for contraception, but then also being able to use it to kind of be able to tell, is my cycle healthy? Are there areas where I can improve it? I think that was one of the areas that was the most kind of attractive for me. Well, so I'm really glad I found you.
So I get a lot of emails, and I get a lot of emails from women saying the same thing that you're saying, which is, I wish I would have known. I wish someone would have told me. And I often get emails from women in their late 30s and 40s who just feel really frustrated. And I always try to encourage, everybody. So you and everyone who's listening, I mean, you can't go back and change anything. It's super frustrating. So I think it's important to honor that. But I also think it's really important to focus on what can I do now? Because then it's a little less depressing. I mean, who hasn't used the pill, right? I use the pill. You use it's actually more rare if you have it. And so I just want to kind of put that out there for everyone who's listening. I mean, the purpose of the podcast isn't to make everyone feel bad about themselves. It's more just to share, because you're right. No one is telling you. So here I am. One of the things that was really interesting too, in terms of the timing, is that when the group program started, that was pretty much exactly when you went off of the pill. And I know in one of our previous, I think it might have been the last session that we had together, or maybe 2 sessions before the last one or something like that. But you had shared something that you had noticed about your sex drive, your libido, that you had maybe you could share that. So I won't give it away, but you could share what you noticed. Well,
that was one of the things that I completely wasn't expecting. My sex drive completely came back, and I didn't even really notice that it had been decreasing. And I kind of put it down to, being a bit kind of stressed and being in work brain all the time. And that was kind of just something that was happening, and I was kind of okay with it. And then I stopped taking the pill, and almost straight away, everything came back, and it was fantastic. My partner loves it. He never wants me to go back on the pill ever again.
This is great.
Yeah, but that has been probably one of the best things so far about having been able to come off it. Going back and remembering, oh, this is what that's supposed to feel like. I am supposed to be into it and want to, be proactive about making things happen, instead of just kind of lying back being like, oh, here we go again. I have to do the things.
Well, it's so important to talk about that. This is just a little sidebar. And then, so I'm not going to talk about this for a really long time, because I will probably have to have an entire podcast episode about this, or 5. But it's really disturbing when you look into the research about how hormonal contraceptives impact your hormone levels, specifically testosterone. And testosterone is really important for us ladies to have a libido. So even though we have about 10% as much testosterone as men do, so they have way more than we do, but we need it. And the studies really show that when you're on hormonal contraceptives, it really lowers your testosterone really significantly. And when you come off of it, what's interesting is that your testosterone will potentially go back up, but not as high as it was if you had never used it. And they don't really know how long. I didn't really see any studies that went long enough to find out how long it actually takes for it to recover fully. So there was one study that showed like a year afterwards, although it had rebounded quite a bit, it still wasn't back to the same level as someone who had never used it. So that's just a side note for anyone who's listening. I think it's really important, your experience of it, because you didn't know. And,
no.
And if you were still on it, you would have just thought it was you. Like, I'm just not, whatever, I'm just not into it. But anyways, that's just a side note, because I often wonder, there's a lot of women that say, I didn't have any side effects. I was totally fine on it. And I have to wonder, because they can measure your testosterone levels. So your testosterone levels are going to be lower when you're on it. So you may not be aware of the fact that it's impacting your libido, but I would be I would have a really hard time believing that it literally isn't affecting your libido when it's literally affecting your hormones. So anyways, so that's a side note.
Can I just have a quick question about that? I'm wondering also if that can be affected by like the different phases that you're in your cycle, because for me, there's a definite shift between being in the pre-ovulatory phase and being in the post-ovulatory phase. Like in the post-ov phase, I'm still a bit like, oh, don't touch me. That's gross. But in the first half of the cycle, that's the big kind of marked shift. And I don't know whether that's got something to do with the different types of hormones or if that's just stuff settling down.
Well, there is an association there. And so it's interesting because I feel like there's two schools of thought on this. So one of my very first interviews, I think it's episode number 4 with Alison Macbeth, she's done some research in this area, and her research really points out that as women, our sex drive is more than just our hormones. So there's a lot of different reasons why we might feel sexual at certain times. And it's not like we're just ruled by our hormones 100%. So I think that's important to point out, that because there could be a time when those hormones are a little bit lower in your cycle naturally, but you're still just, it's a great day. And there's a lot of reasons why you might want to have sex that have nothing to do with your hormones. But to answer your question, it's really common for women to experience that kind of heightened arousal in the pre-ovulatory phase, and particularly around ovulation. For not every woman will notice that, but a lot of women do. And it does have to do with your hormone levels, because at that point in your cycle, your estrogen levels are really high. And, even other aspects, a lot of women will talk about how they feel emotionally during different points of their cycle, and how at that point of their cycle around ovulation is when they feel the most creative. They have lots of energy, their skin's glowing, their partners, the pheromones are going. So you probably smell a whole lot better to your partner, like subliminally or something like that. Yeah. And what's interesting, which is good that you didn't have this experience, is that there are research studies that show, and I think a lot of listeners have heard of this, that when you're on hormonal contraceptives, it can change how just the pheromones. So things that we don't consciously are not aware of. And so you might choose a partner because that partner, smells good to you and it feels good. But then sometimes you stop taking the hormones and all of a sudden your partner doesn't smell good to you anymore.
I was so worried about that.
I can't even imagine what that would be like.
No, me either.
So I'm glad that wasn't your experience.
Me too.
But in terms of, so now I think we're going into cycle 3 now. So cycle 3 post pill. Yeah. So what I would encourage you to do is kind of one of the things that I always talk about, which is as you're beginning this process, you're acquainting yourself with your cycle and how it impacts everything. And so it's a good idea to kind of just note those things just for interest's sake. You won't be noting it, a year from now, because you'll just kind of know what's typical for you. But I think it can be really helpful to note, like, ooh, around this time of my cycle, he smells really good. Because I know personally, my experience is definitely that around ovulation, I definitely just feel it. I feel interested, pronounced.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That's a word.
Yeah.
Mother Nature's trying to get you pregnant. That's the whole whole point. But then if someone's listening and they don't always feel that around ovulation, I think that's why I wanted to talk about the other part, which is because, I mean, you can fully be in that period of time, but if you have a huge fight with your partner, it's not like you're a slave to your hormones.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yes. So there was a few things that you wanted to talk about today. I think a good place to start is I just wanted to go through your form. So I spoke about that in the previous call that I aired last week, which is that for all of my clients, before we have our one-on-one sessions together, I send them a checklist so that we can really get a sense of where they're at with their fertility awareness knowledge. And it also just helps to make sure that we go through and cover anything. So basically anything that's really important about charting protocols on the form. So it gives us a good roadmap. One of the things that you put on there was arousal. Okay, so one of the questions is, can you tell the difference between mucus, arousal fluid, and semen? So as you can imagine, for everyone listening, that's something that I talk about with all my clients. It's part of the group program. We really go into it. It comes up a number of times, so it's not usually something that we just have one conversation about. It's usually something that we talk about, and then you go and like do stuff and observe things and then come back and figure it all out. So we've spoken a lot about arousal fluid and how to tell the difference. One of the things that I just wanted to share with you is one of the things that we've gone through in the group program is the semen elimination technique, which is just a way of getting rid of semen after unprotected sex, so that the following day you can be more confident about your cervical mucus observations. So one of the things, Amy, that I just wanted to talk about in terms of that is that once you get really comfortable with the semen elimination technique and just doing it, then you don't really have to ever hurt your brain to try to figure out the difference between semen and cervical mucus, because then once you're good with it, then you've gotten rid of it, like it's gone. And so then the following day, you're good, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't, because we haven't gone unprotected yet. I just haven't had a chance to even be able to tell or to try the technique yet, but we'll get there.
And I think what could be helpful, because now you're going into this with like all this knowledge. So one of the things that could be helpful is once we do get to that point where you're starting to go unprotected, post-ovulatory, and then we kind of work through the progressions, is it might be a good idea. So for instance, the first time that you do go unprotected, that you don't do the semen elimination technique and see what it's like the next day.
Okay.
Because then you can get a sense, because that'll clarify why we do it.
You have a reference point. Yep.
Because then you'll be like, oh, I don't know, like there's all this stuff coming out of me. Like, I don't know what's going on. I can't tell like anything from anything. And then you do it the other way. And then you'll be like, oh, that's why we do this. Okay. Makes perfect sense.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think that would be good. Little experiment. But yeah, once you have that sorted out, then what you'll find is that the following day, so you never really have to differentiate the two, although we do talk about how to. So semen tends to be a little mustier. It doesn't have the same stretchy qualities that mucus does. I think it's kind of gross to say, but it's TMI here today, but there's a smell associated, like it kind of smells like man. I always say like it kind of has that musty.
Yep.
Like bad. But and your mucus doesn't, like, because mucus doesn't really have the smell associated with it. Not really. Not anything of note. If it does, that could mean something else. And so in terms of the technique itself, then once you're like there and you're ready to do it, we talked about that. Do you have any questions about the how?
No, I understand the theory.
Okay, good.
I just need to put it into practice.
Okay. The rest of the questions on the forum, I think you have a pretty good handle on it. Actually, for the audience, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, how did you feel about charting before you started the group? And how do you feel about it now?
Before I started, I was curious, but not confident. And so I would definitely not have trusted myself to start learning the method or being able to, I wouldn't have applied it on my own, because I figured I'd been on the pill for such a long time, like my cycles probably wouldn't be normal. And I didn't want to just be charting them on my own and assuming that everything was normal and that all of the assumptions that I was making were correct. And so that's why I decided to come off the pill round about the same time that we were starting the program. just because I don't really want to have a baby right now. And the stakes seemed pretty high if I screwed it up. So now, having done the program, I'm way more confident, but it's also not quite as complicated as I thought it would be. At the same time, though, it's been good to have the safety net and to be able to talk to other people in the group who have similar sort of questions or who can answer my questions, and getting advice from someone like you who knows exactly what they're doing and can make sure that I also know exactly what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, so obviously Amy was in the birth control group. So this time around, I separated it, and it's the same information. It's the same method, but we do have a different focus. It's just the way that it is. It's different, but the same. So the same things come up in terms of when you notice that there's certain things happening in your cycle that are potentially irregular. And one of the things about the birth control group is that even though none of the women in the group were ready to, start a family anytime soon, most of the women in the group did have a horizon. So whether that horizon was a year or 2 or 5, so those aspects of it still come in. But with my other group, pregnancy focused, whether it's actively trying right now or preconception kind of planning, they're just a little bit different of a focus. So one of the things that we spoke about in the group, and we'll be talking a little bit more about today, was the progression. Because so in your case, you went off the pill, but you had a backup barrier method. I think it's really important to know that you do need to have at least, the recommendation is 3 full cycles. I mean, when you're working with an instructor, we can kind of phase you in. So, but absolutely the first cycle, that's not the time to go unprotected. There's a lot that happens. Part of it is the deprogramming. So we talked a lot about that in the group, which was, so even though you know the science and you learn the method and you have me coaching you through it, you still have to go home and have the unprotected sex on the infertile day. And the first time you do that, you probably have a little mini heart attack inside, because we were programmed to believe that every day is fertile, and you haven't experienced that yet.
No. I did, though, in my first chart at the end of my first cycle, and we had not had unprotected sex. And I still was convinced at the end. I was like, I'm pregnant. This method does not work. Whoever said that you can only be fertile for a couple of days a month, that's crap. I'm definitely pregnant. And of course I wasn't. But it does take a while to unlearn all of that you've been taught.
Yeah. Well, we had some good discussions around that. So I think I like the group environment because I felt like it's the only place in the world you can talk about that. I don't know where else you could get together with a bunch of women and talk about that natural fear that you have the first time you have unprotected sex on an infertile day, following all the rules, but still is my period really going to come? Does this really work? So the answer is yes, it does, provided that you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing on the days that you're supposed to be doing it. So the first thing is to figure those days out. Okay. So you had some questions about your chart. So let's go into your chart. So of course, the listeners, they won't be able to see the chart, but you had some questions about how to identify which days are infertile in your chart. So I guess a little bit of background information is that I think this is really important too for everyone listening. When you come off of hormonal contraceptives, I have yet to see a woman come off of hormonal contraceptives and have her cycle parameters just be normal. Now, I think that what I think is interesting is that so many women go to their physicians and, should I go off of the pill or should I not? And if I want to have a baby in a year, should I come off of it early? And often the physician's saying no. So there is research that shows that most women do ovulate within 3 to 9 months of coming off of the pill. If you're looking at the depot shot, that's longer. The time horizon is more 18 months. But the fact that you ovulate doesn't mean that your cycle is healthy and that the parameters are good. And some women, if they have an underlying problem, may go a year and even more without ovulating, just because they might have an underlying problem. Anyways, so I guess that was the preface to say that when I look at your chart, we're seeing a bit of a mucus pattern that it's not a normal mucus pattern, but it's typical of what something we would see after coming off the pill. So basically we had like, how many days of mucus is that? Like 20?
So many days.
So many days of mucus just in a row. But considering that this is the second cycle off hormonal contraceptives, that's something that you just kind of have to roll with it, because it does take several cycles for everything to settle out. And then once we've gone through a couple cycles, we can really start to see if there are any underlying issues and challenges that you have to address to help shorten that mucus pattern, mucus cycle, because we're not supposed to have 20 days of it.
Nope.
So that makes it challenging for using the method as birth control, especially because even though obviously like it's literally impossible to get pregnant on all of those days, but you have to consider them fertile because you just don't know what's going to happen the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is where I have the questions about what days in this chart you could go unprotected. And I think, so I was reading the handout that you gave us about the rules progression. And so you have to, I know that you have to wait like for the count of 3, and you have to wait for like the temperature to match up and then for peak day. And I can see that on this chart, but the area where I'm confused is that the day that you go unprotected has to be a dry day, like there's no mucus. So would that rule out, so in my chart after that, so I've got peak day and then on day 30 and then on day 34 there's a dry day and then on day 39 there's also a dry day. Are they the only 2 days in that cycle where unprotected would be safe?
Well, no.
Okay.
The reason for that is because, so once you confirm ovulation with the combination of your mucus, which we did, and your temperature, the rest of your cycle is infertile. And so the mucus that you're having, so you're seeing non-peak mucus, so kind of white, not stretchy, pasty, cloudy type mucus. There's a number of reasons why you might be seeing that. So because this is cycle number 2 off the pill that we're looking at right now, again, part of it is that's just the hormones doing their thing. I'm curious to see what your next cycle is going to look like. But there's a number of reasons. So basically, when you have that non-peak mucus that kind of keeps going after ovulation, it can mean a couple things. So, I mean, one of the things it can mean is that you just came off the pill. That's one, which you did. But if we continue to see it, so if this is something that we continue to see, it can be telling us something about your hormone levels. So potentially progesterone isn't high enough to suppress that mucus production, or maybe your liver isn't fully detoxifying and metabolizing estrogen efficiently enough. So instead of getting rid of it, maybe it's kind of circulating around your bloodstream and stimulating your cervix in the post-ovulatory phase. And that's why we're seeing it. So there's a number of different reasons why we might be seeing it. But to answer your question, so then we would have, so we have your peak day, and that was day 30. And then we do the count of 3. So the peak day is the last day that we saw mucus that was clear, stretchy, or slippery. And then we have to consider the 3 days afterwards fertile, because they are for a number of reasons, and potentially fertile. And then we have day 34 as you had a dry day there. It also corresponds with your temperature. So your temperatures are staying high consistently. So we know that you've ovulated. And so for the rest of your cycle, we would consider all those days to be infertile.
Okay, regardless of whether or not there's mucus?
Yeah. So, and that's because we've confirmed it with temperature. And so we know that that is not a mucus pattern leading up to ovulation because you've already ovulated. We know that is mucus happening for a different reason. And from my perspective, that's something that we'll be working on throughout the next couple months in the alumni program to really try to, what we're working to see is to see that just dry up. So supporting progesterone production, or just figuring out what we can do to reduce your estrogen or improve your body's ability to metabolize it, or whatever the case in those situations.
Okay, cool. And so then any day after day 34 would then be safe.
Yes, all of the days, 34, 35, 36. And so then your luteal phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So your luteal phase is on the short side. And again, that is something that we would unfortunately expect to see. So what we typically see, just to give you an idea so you don't feel like you're the only one in the world, is when you come off the pill, we typically see a few things. So irregular mucus patterns, so that could be like lots of it, or it could be barely any. It just depends on the woman. We could see delayed ovulation. That's something that we could see. Often the luteal phase is short, especially those first few cycles. So that's something that is quite typical for coming off of hormonal contraceptives. And so again, that's why I'm really thorny about the recommendations of just come off of it right before you're trying to conceive. We all know that some women do conceive right after they've come off of hormonal contraceptives, but knowing everything that I know about how the pill impacts your nutrient stores and all that, it's just not ideal. But particularly if you were trying to get pregnant, so if this was a different situation for you and you had just come off of it, a 9-day luteal phase is not helpful.
No, it's not long enough, is it?
No. So yeah, so it's typical. And so then what we would, as the hormones exit your body, as we support your body through nutrition, all those different types of things, we would typically see that lengthen. And then we just keep an eye on it. So if it doesn't start to lengthen, then we just focus on figuring out why. So all of the different reasons why that could be happening.
Okay, sure.
But just so that you know that it is a normal reaction to your body coming off of the pill.
Awesome. Yeah. There's so much. I just assume that everything in my chart is strange at the moment because of having come off the pill. So I probably won't even start to get even concerned about anything for another few charts because I still don't know what's normal.
Yeah.
Even my first 2 charts were completely different from each other.
Well, your first chart looked pretty textbook for what it's worth. Yeah. A pretty short fertile window and ovulation around day 20, luteal phase. Yeah, it was a little bit different. But, and then the other thing we've talked about a bit was your temperatures have been a little bit up and down. So I'm really interested to see what the temperatures will be like. I think I've said that in the group before. I'm interested to see if that's going to settle down. One of the things that I think is really interesting, just from my perspective, bird's eye view, because I've seen a lot of charts. When I started charting, I always thought of the temperature as the gold standard. That was my initial experience. So I really relied heavily on the temperature, and I didn't really grasp the mucus. I didn't grasp the mucus until I worked with somebody who understood mucus. But the interesting thing is that there's so many things that can vary your temperature. So whether it's travel, illness, even allergies, food sensitivities and things like that can mess up the temperature. So in Amy's chart, for those of you who obviously can't look at the chart, the temperatures were up and down, really spiky for a number of different reasons. So I think it's really helpful to be able to rely on mucus, especially when you're using the method for birth control.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that you wanted to go through too was the rules progression. So why don't we go through that a little bit? So essentially, the rules progression is a really conservative way to take you through the process of getting confident using the method for birth control. So it's really conservative because we want you to be successful, basically. And in order to progress to another stage of actually using the method successfully for birth control, you really have to grasp a few things first. So before you can even start having unprotected sex on your infertile days, you first have to understand what's going on. And you really need to be able to identify ovulation confidently and identify menstruation confidently. So Amy, how do you feel on that front so far?
I feel okay about it. With this second chart, definitely more confident. And so I don't think I'm going through this, the progressions at the ideal pace. I feel like I'm still on kind of the rules for the first charted cycle, just because things are a little bit more kind of tricky. But hopefully things are better in this third one that I'm doing. And that'll make it a little bit easier.
Well, and something to keep in mind too is that there's no ideal. Every woman is different. I think that's really important to note. I know that some women feel comfortable at earlier stages and other women will wait 3 months before even using it. And I think that I think it's a really good opportunity for you to just check in with yourself and see what you're comfortable with, because I can't say there's no wrong, but technically there isn't, right? Like there's no right and wrong. This is more of a suggestion for how to gain your confidence. So the recommendation then for the first cycle that you're charting is to not have unprotected sex, which would make a lot of sense. But the reason for that is because one of the biggest mistakes that women do make if you're using the method for birth control is not really being clear on how to identify ovulation. And we've spoken a lot about that. There's certain events that you need to know about, especially if you've come off of hormonal contraceptives recently, because, you read the progressions and you think, okay, so I'm going to have my period and then, progress to ovulation. And then after that, I'll be fine. I just feel like that's an area where a lot of women take a lot of risks.
Yes.
It's like, well, I think I ovulated because I saw mucus and it went away. My temperatures are kind of weird, but whatever.
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. And then, you have unprotected sex, and then all of a sudden you have all this peak mucus that comes back because your ovulation was just delayed, and that's why your temperatures were kind of weird. And so I think that's really important. And especially because it's totally understandable, because your cycles are not textbooks. So we do have to be a bit more cautious, a bit more aware, and really good with the rules. So then so there's a couple benchmarks. So then once you have the confidence in identifying ovulation, and you really have the discipline to wait until your mucus and your temperatures match up. So that means that if you are sick right around ovulation, which is really unfortunate, but if that happens, then you can't rely on that temperature. You have to wait an extra day, things like that. But once you're good with that, and you're good with identifying ovulation, and you've done that for a cycle or two, then we can move on to the next phase, which is that you start having unprotected sex. And so the conservative rule would say every other day of your post-ovulatory phase. So we've already spoken about why that would be. So we talked about the semen elimination technique and how you get to the point where you get used to getting rid of the semen after sex so that the next day you can rely on your observations. The reason that you would consider going every other day, and so like I said, you might be at a different stage with this, but the reason that you would consider that is to give yourself that bit of practice so that you can really be confident in your observations. I've had a number of women to ask me, like, well, why would I even bother checking for mucus in my post-ovulatory phase? Like, I know I'm not fertile, so why would I be checking my mucus? I think that, especially in your case, and especially when you're working with someone like me, where it's not just about using the method for birth control, it's also about trying to figure out what's happening with your cycles and to really help to move them towards a healthy direction. So that's why we would still want to watch, so that we can see, because you're not supposed to have mucus in your post-ovulatory phase. So if you continue to have it, then we really need to look at that. So these are super conservative. Because we've already talked about the semen elimination technique, and I feel like every other day doesn't really make sense for you. Once you get comfortable in the post-ovulatory phase, you could just every day.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like I'm in the, like having a look at this chart in the equivalent of the second charted cycle. That's probably what I would be looking at for this month if my chart makes a bit more sense, if ovulation is clear.
Yeah. Well, and until your mucus patterns settle out, there's no days to have sex pre-ovulatory.
Oh, I know it.
But we can talk a little bit about the pre-ovulatory. Once we're good with ovulation, and once we're good with having sex in the post-ovulatory phase, we're good with the semen elimination technique. So we've been practicing, really good with the observations the following day, so that even if you've had sex the day before, you're good to know that you can trust your observations. Then once your cycles start to level out, initially you consider menstruation to be fertile, but we've spoken a little bit about that in the group. Once you're confident in being able to identify that it's a true menstrual bleed, then you can consider your heavy, very heavy, or moderate days to be infertile. I mean, you didn't have your period for 10 years, but now that you can identify ovulation, how confident do you feel about identifying your menstruation?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I feel like once you're good with the ovulation, because then in your previous cycle, you had it looked like potentially ovulation spotting. We talked a little bit about that, but maybe you could just share how that was different to your period, like how you would know that that wasn't your period.
It was way lighter. It was like when I get my period, it's there and it's super clear and there's like a good, I guess, flow. And this was just a little bit of spotting for a couple of days.
Yeah, I think that that's really important because then it's like one of the rookie mistakes, which is, oh, I have my period. Let's have sex. Oops, I'm ovulating. Oh, where's the morning after? Yeah. So that's really important. But we're in an advanced level because we've been together for the last 10 weeks. You've absorbed all the information. You just haven't had the opportunity to practice it. So I think what you'll find is that it'll be easier for you to progress through these. So you might find that you progress through. So the progression that I'm talking about, I have it laid out here for my clients. I have a handout made for them. Basically, if you were to take it in the most conservative way until you're using the method fully, so pre-ovulatory dry days, like the whole thing, really confident. But to get you to that point from a conservative standpoint, we would take up to anywhere from 4 to 5 cycles. So just to give you the opportunity to take your time and really get comfortable with each stage. But I feel like, especially, it just depends on your comfort level. But yeah, I don't think that it would take 5 cycles. But with that being said, you may or may not have the opportunity to use your pre-ovulatory phase if you don't have any pre-ovulatory dry days. So that would put a little wrench in there. But assuming, we can talk about the progression. So that's the first half. I feel like that's in a way the easy part. And there's a lot of women out there that only use the method in their post-ovulatory period because that is a very clear for them. But the challenge then is that if you don't really know how to chart your mucus and you're just not comfortable with that, then you're probably not going to use your pre-ovulatory dry days if you're never really clear. But in your case, so because you'll be able to identify which days are dry, which days are not, which days are fertile and infertile. So you would consider your heavy, very heavy days to be fertile or to be infertile. So those are safe days. And then on your days of light or very light bleeding, what you have to do is you have to check for mucus on those days, just like you would on any other day. And then based on what you observe, you decide. So if you have a really light day of bleeding and you check all day and it's dry and there's no mucus, then that's an infertile day as well. And so then we would just go into your pre-ovulatory window. So basically, your pre-ovulatory period. So the next stage of that would be you would consider any pre-ovulatory dry days. So it's dry all day. And you would have consider yourself infertile the evening of every other dry day. So this is the same rationale. So again, you may or may not need to go every other day, just depending on how comfortable you are with your mucus observations the next day. So by the time you get to that point, you'll have lots of practice with the semen elimination technique and in your post-ovulatory period. So you may or may not need to do every other evening.
Okay.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah. Because by then it's like, I get it, Lisa. I don't need it. You'll get a sense then, because although you may get rid of the semen, you may still have some arousal fluid potentially the following morning or something like that. So part of getting comfortable with it and part of why the every other day could be helpful, especially in the pre-ovulatory phase, is just to get used to all of that and just to see how it presents. So you can be just really confident. So that gives you the opportunity to kind of play around with that a little bit to make sure you're comfortable.
Okay, great.
So once you've got that, so we're doing evenings, so dry all day, you're really comfortable with that. Then we would get into like every day. So that's the next phase. And then in the last phase, once you're really comfortable, then you don't have to wait till the evening, basically. So the last, like the final phase is like not the evenings, but it's like if it's a dry day, anytime during the day. I don't know. Tell me, how does that feel? Or is there...
That last phase actually is a little bit confusing for me because most of the time, like in my pre-ov phase, I tend to only be able to find the mucus at night. Like it doesn't show up for the rest of the day. So like, yeah, that's a bit, I don't know, maybe I have to progress through the rest of the rules for that to make sense. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of a bit where right now I go, oh, that doesn't sound right. That sounds confusing. How would I know?
Well, so this takes us back to the physiology of why the method works. And so when you are observing a dry day where you have no mucus present, that is telling us something about your estrogen levels. So as you know, your estrogen levels at that point are too low to trigger ovulation, unless there's something going on. There's some women have very little mucus, and that could be a different issue altogether, potentially an issue with their cervix or something like that. But so we know you can make mucus. So if you have a dry day, it means that your estrogen levels are too low to trigger ovulation. But what it also means is that your vagina, the pH of your vagina is acidic. And we talked about that in the group and talked about the specific pH. So your vagina is acidic. Sperm can't live without mucus. And sperm are not super robust little dudes. Like they're pretty flimsy. Like they really need to have a specific type of environment. So a man's ejaculate is alkaline. It's that perfect pH for them. But when they enter your vagina, if you do not have any mucus present, there's nothing for them there. It's like the desert or something. So they just don't live very long. They die within minutes, maybe like an hour. Like they just...
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
of course.
I'll just throw in that your cervix is also closed. And then on your dry day, your cervix is plugged with the mucus plug that we talked about, which means that just picture trying to walk through like a solid jelly wall of goo with a mesh fence in it. That's what's going on. So there's all of those things that are working. So that's why. But then when you do have mucus, that's telling us, okay, cervix is open, estrogen levels are rising, we're approaching ovulation. And then when you do have mucus present, sperm can live up to 5 days because the mucus transports them into your cervical crypt so they can...
Oh, that's where I'm confused. That's the bit I couldn't get my head around. I thought they'd all just be hanging around, like waiting for the mucus to come and take them up where they could hang out for like 5 more days.
No.
But I understand now.
Just picture them like dying. So yeah, I love the analogy. Like your vagina is it's a sperm killing machine. I think it's the coolest
vicious.
thing ever. It's totally vicious. And what I always talk about too is that it's not just like an anti-sperm protocol, although it is. It's also an anti-bad guy protocol. So I think it's really interesting to note that an adult woman has a more acidic vagina than a teenager. And that is so the natural balance of our vagina and our vaginal flora is such that it prevents bacterial overgrowth and yeast overgrowth and all that stuff. And from a geeky science perspective, like I ferment things now. So I made sauerkraut last weekend and I make kefir and stuff. But if you've ever, so I'll get to the point. So stick with me. But when you ferment vegetables, the bacteria, they eat the food, they make their little carbon dioxide, and they create lactic acid. So the brine that your vegetables are in is acidic, and that acidity prevents mold, it prevents fungus. And it's amazing from a geeky science perspective to ferment things on your counter, because then you put them in your fridge and you can leave them there for like a year or two and they never go bad. And it's because of this acidic environment that has been created by the fermentation process. So you can think about your vagina that way. I'm sure that no one's ever made that connection before, but here I am. But it's the same idea, because then your vagina is acidic. So nothing that isn't supposed to be there can survive in there, only the good guys. So I think it's interesting. A lot of women notice that when they go on hormonal contraceptives, so we know that it interferes with your gut flora, and because it's interfering with the flora, it can interfere with your vagina. I'd be curious to know if the pH changes. I'll have to do a little bit of research there, because I know that a number of women in general, they go on the pill, they start getting yeast infections. Well, if your vagina is at the appropriate pH, it kills yeast, right? So
yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
I do love to talk about vaginas, so I feel like I'm going to have to just continue to compare vaginas to things. So who knows what I'll do next time. Let's compare vaginas to fermentation. Yes. That's what's going on here. But yes, we just have a couple minutes left. Was there any other questions you wanted to make sure we chatted about before we ended tonight?
No, just like the rules. And I think we've covered that. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Excellent. And I said tonight, so I think just a fun fact. So Amy is in Australia. And yes. So it is tomorrow. So this conversation is kind of happening in the future, which is pretty fun in a way. You're already in tomorrow.
It is pretty cool talking to someone in the past.
Yeah. So I guess just to tie everything up for the listeners, the listeners who tune into my on-air client calls, they're probably using the method, I imagine, and maybe even considering the program. So obviously the program is going live in April, and I know a lot of women are thinking, like, is it worth it? What am I going to learn? I've had a number of questions. I had a few women ask me, like, are you going to like show me how to use a thermometer? Like, is it like that? Like, is it so, the kind of like fear that it's going to be so like, and this is how you take your temperature and whatever. So if maybe you could just share something for that listener for what your experience was like being part of the group.
Yeah, my experience, I probably could have done with some really basic lessons like, and this is how you take your temperature. But I was coming to it with no knowledge at all. And what was great about it was that it came with everything that I needed to get started. But then it also seemed like there were other people in the group who've been doing charts for ages and just needed like a bit of help to kind of refine things or get clarity on what they were doing. And it seems like at the same time as being able to help me get started and figure out like, what am I doing and what is this mucus? At the same time, other people who were more advanced were able to, I guess, learn things at the level that they were ready for. So it was perfect for me. And I think it was, I don't know, I haven't spoken to the other people in the group, but they seemed like they were getting a lot of value out of that as well. So I think whatever point that you're at, if you have questions or you're not sure or like your cycle is a bit weird, then yeah, definitely the group sessions were a really good place to start. I'm really glad that I started there.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. You guys were so awesome. I told you all that midway through, I'd be like, so does anyone have any questions about the method? You guys were like, we're good. I was just like, wow, this is like record time. You guys have this stuff down so quickly. So for me, I know that it's a lot of information, and I know I've had a long time to absorb it all. So I kind of feel bad in those first couple sessions because here I am like laying it all out. But what's interesting is that although there's something to the method, there's a lot of just different aspects to it, and especially learning a new language. But what I find is that once you've got it down and you go away, like you kind of like, I share the stuff and then you go home and you try it and then you come back and, we talk about it and then you go home and try it again. I feel like it really does not take that long for you to be good. Like it really doesn't take that long for you to get the method part. I think the more challenging part is the getting your cycles healthy. That's what ends up being more of the challenge than actually getting the method down.
Yeah, that's how it feels as well. Big part of the sessions. Like the rules, they're kind of easy, but figuring everything else out is the difficult bit.
So if you could go back and talk to your 16-year-old self, was it 16?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
All right, 16-year-old self, what would you say to her?
I don't know in terms of what I would say. I would arm her with a lot more resources and a lot more information about going on the pill and the side effects and the alternatives out there. Because I don't think that when I was 16, I was even presented with any other option. It was just, I was in the doctor's office and they said, well, you should go on the pill. I said, well, what else can I do? And they were like, just go on the pill. It's fine. You might have like a heightened risk of, I think maybe they said breast cancer or maybe you're protected against breast cancer. I can't remember. That was all that I got though. So I think I would have liked to know that there were just other options out there and other options that worked.
And then for the woman who's listening, who's on hormonal birth control, what would you tell her?
Probably a similar thing. I think it's fine to be on birth control if it's the right thing for you and, you don't want to learn another sort of method and it's working for you. But at the same time, I think it's also important to understand what it is that you're taking and kind of the side effects that it can have, and maybe digging around a little bit to see if those are things that you're affected by. Because I'm not completely anti-pill, but I'm glad that I came off it because I did the research that I'd kind of never bothered to do before.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I should just be honest and say that I'm pretty anti-pill, but my mission isn't like no one should ever take the pill. I would say that I really believe in my heart. So I've been doing a bit of research and I've been speaking to some women because I'm just around their experiences with the pill. So I have some ideas for some episodes coming up with some real woman stories who have potentially not had positive experiences on the pill. It really bothers me on a really deep level that women just are not informed. I think that's the thing, because I really believe that if women were fully informed, just in the whole picture of how important their menstrual cycles are, how they're integral to our health, and also all of the side effects. You were told that it could be like you were given like a list of 2 side effects, but honestly, there's a lot of side effects and we should be advised that these are possibilities. Anyways, so without going too much into that soapbox, I believe that if women did know all of the things around the pill that we've spent 2 years talking about on the podcast, that they wouldn't never go on the pill, but potentially organize their lives in such a way that maybe they would be on it for less time. That would be my hope, that instead of being on it for 15 years, maybe be on it for 3.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wish. I wish that I knew more earlier, but I'm also glad that I found out kind of with enough time that if there were any problems, there's heaps of time for me to get all of that sorted out before I start worrying like, oh gosh, am I too old to have a baby?
Yes. Well, Amy, thank you so much. It has been a treat and a pleasure having you on the show. And I just want to thank you for being so honest and open and vulnerable and sharing this very private conversation in a very public way. I really appreciate it. And I know the listeners appreciate it too.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for having me. It's been good fun.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/130. I hope that you enjoyed my live, well, not live, but sort of like live session with Amy. It was such a treat to have her on the show and to jump into the nitty-gritty of charting and to talk about some of the rules and the progression. I think that this episode is going to be really helpful for a lot of you, and to really normalize that you don't learn the fertility awareness method and jump into it that month and feel 100% confident. It actually takes some time and some support to really get to that place of confidence. And so it's not hard really to get there, but it does take a little bit of time. I always say that it does take quite a bit of deprogramming to get to the point where you really get, first of all, emotionally, that you can have sex on certain days of your cycle and not get pregnant. But there's another stage that even though you can get it in your head from a scientific standpoint, it takes another level and another period of time to really trust that. And part of what makes you able to trust it is really being really clear on what's happening. And so that's the whole reason that I do this and work with clients, and why I do the group programs, because the message that I want to share with you is that it is possible to get to that point where you do have clarity, 100% clarity, where you know every single day what's going on, you know whether or not you're fertile. And then beyond that, you also know what your cycle parameters are saying about your overall health. And so that's one of my superpowers that I've been honing for a decade, is that I'm able to decode the charts. So I can really look at a chart and really quickly connect you with what could be, going on beyond just using the method for birth control. So yeah, those are 2 distinct aspects of all of the work that I do, whether it's with clients or with my group program. One is to get you to the point that you're really, really comfortable and confident and you totally get it. And so you know exactly how it works and there's no question about it. So the confidence piece is really important. But then beyond that, I'm looking at your cycle from the perspective of what is off. Let's see what's really going on. Let's get a baseline. And then let's see what we can do if your parameters are outside of what's normal. And so there's a lot that we can do. But the first step is really getting a clear understanding of what's happening. and you do that by really good, accurate charting. And so I do hope you enjoy this episode. Let me know if you like the Fertility Awareness reality series. I've done a few episodes previously. I would love to hear your feedback if this is something that you're enjoying, if you would like me to do more of these, if you're finding it helpful. I'd love to hear more about that. If you are wanting to be part of the group program, head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and make sure to apply to reserve your spot in the April groups. And again, if you'd like to join me on my live masterclass and have the opportunity to ask some questions about period health in particular, what's normal and what it means if you're bleeding too much or bleeding too little, please join us. So you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/masterclass. So if you're not able to join live, make sure to sign up anyways, because that's the only way to get the replay. So even if you're not able to join me at the time when I'm there and ask questions live and everything, if you're not signed up, then you won't have access to the replay. So I encourage you to do that. And I just want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast, letting me be part of your day. And I know a lot of you are listening right now on your way to work, and maybe you're in the gym, walking the dog, whatever it is. I really appreciate the amazing support. The Fertility Friday community is the absolute best. You're all amazing, so supportive. And I really appreciate all of the support that you've shown for the show. If you're not part of the Fertility Friday Facebook community, make sure to jump in and join us in there. We talk about the episodes in there, and I know there's a lot of great questions that we discuss and different things. So you'll find us at fertilityfriday.com/community if you want to join us in there. And until next time, be well and happy charting.